This is Interpreting Wine host and founder Lawrence Francis, welcoming you to this, my Willamette Valley Winemaker Special. Across these 20 episodes recorded in quickfire fashion in January 2020, I got to meet a broad selection of people making wine in the region, both a variety of winemaking scale from the micro to the macro, and also different focuses that include different aging vessels, different grape varieties, sparkling wines, and of course different interpretations of Pinot. Episodes are going to be released in the order that they were recorded, so you'll get to be a virtual guest on the tour. 2 things you can do to help spread this series even further. One is to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, either where you're listening or on your favorite podcast platform. And the second, the one that's really going to help push this out there, is to head to interpretingwine.com/iTunes and leave a review letting me know what you think. A genuine, huge thank you in advance. Today's episode of the Willamette Valley Winemaker Special features Michelle Kaufmann and Kate Payne-Brown of Chehalem and Stoller Wineries. We hear from both Michelle and Kate their origin story and transition into the winery. Michelle then gives us an overview of the various brands. They then share duties leading a tasting of 7 wines that really demonstrate the diversity of the portfolio and includes a sparkling wine, 2 Chardonnays, a Rosé of Pinot Noir, and 3 Pinot Noirs. The pair then close out this episode by looking ahead, and it's worth saying that they're both looking to bring these wines to the UK. Enjoy.
I'm Michelle Kaufmann, Communications Director at the Stoller Wine Group. We have 5 wine brands here in Oregon. Today we're really focusing on our Stoller Family Estate brand and our Chehalem Winery brand. And our story honestly begins about 50 or so years ago. So our owner, Bill Stoller, purchased his family's farm in the mid-90s. They purchased the entire estate in 1943, and it was a turkey farm. And at the height of our turkey farming days, we had 700,000 turkeys roaming the hillside. I don't know what 700,000 turkeys looks like, but I always try and figure out that in my mind as I tell this story. And Bill, grew up farming turkeys with his dad and his uncle and went off to college, started his career in staffing. And as he was starting to come into his earning power and his buying power, he decided, like all people do, I should figure out this wine thing and what wine's like. So he's taking this wine appreciation class at Portland Community College in the mid-'80s, and he meets one of the Oregon wine industry pioneers, who at that time is taking in investors in his vineyard. And there's 30, maybe 40-ish investors, and Bill becomes one of them. And they spend probably 2 to 3 years doing that before his partner's like, I want to start a winery with all this fruit we've been growing. I've been making wine, at home. You guys have enjoyed drinking that. Let's start a bonded winery. And of all the investors in the vineyard, only Bill was like, yeah, let's do it. I don't sound anything like Bill Stoller. Caveat. So he and his partner spent a couple years what does this look like? Where are we going to make wine? How are we going to make wine? Et cetera, et cetera. And as that conversation is happening, the Stoller family decides we're going to sell off the turkey farm. We all have day jobs. Mom and dad have retired. Let's get out of the turkey business. And Bill's like, okay, this land would make for an exceptional vineyard. I think that we should buy this, and it could be an estate vineyard for Chehalem. So he does that. At the exact same time, they solidify their partnership, and Bill becomes a 50% partner in Chehalem. And for a long time, that was the extent. The Stoller property was just going to be a vineyard only, where he could then sell fruit to Chehalem, maybe a couple other vineyards in the Willamette, or wineries in the Willamette Valley. End of story. But this dream, as all dreams do, change. And in 2001, Bill decided he wanted just a little bit of wine for his own personal cellar. And his partner was making the wine for him. And by 2003, they're like, I think you should hire your own winemaker. This is becoming its own brand. So Bill goes out on the great winemaker hunt and hires a young woman named Melissa Burr, who had done 2 vintages of wine. And Melissa became our first designated winemaker for the Stoller Family Estate brand. This last vintage, she just finished her 17th harvest with our company. And she's terribly sad that she's not here tonight. In 2005, the brand made wine at Chehalem for its first 2 vintages. They decided that it was time to build its own winery. And they set out on this big conquest of what that would look like and where to make it and how to make it. And when they went out on it, LEED certification, leadership in environmental and energy design, was just coming online as like a thing for buildings. And so they're like, let's give it a shot. Let's see if we can build a LEED winery. And they go on to build the world's first LEED Gold certified winery. There's one other LEED winery that had hit that bronze stature. And of course now there's, I think, platinum and double platinum. But at the time, 2005, for no one to be on that sort of forward thinking in building was quite remarkable in our industry. And then today, where are we at today? Chehalem has been trucking along. Chehalem has really prided itself. So it had, the original vineyard at Ridgecrest. That's the name of that one. It had the Stoller property. And in 1995, when Bill and his partner Harry had been figuring out where they were going to make their wine, there was a winery that was started by a couple of doctors that decided they wanted to get out of the business. And so they were selling off their property, and Bill and Harry purchased that existing vineyard and that winery, and today that's still our current winemaking space. So it's kind of fun. I actually brought some wine from Corral Creek, which is where our estate vineyard is. Almost 2 years ago now, Bill's partner retired. Harry's not the sort of man who will ever actually retire. Which is it's no disrespect to Harry, but he wanted to start to scale back a little bit. So Bill became full owner of Chehalem in February of 2018. It's just about 2 years ago now. Kate, you've been with us, 6 years?
Yeah, I've been with Stoller, I guess, for 6 years, but full-time for about 5 years. So I started in 2014, kind of a part-time in a consulting basis. And then as we were expanding, they asked me to come on and really manage the reserve tier, which you'll taste some, and the sparkling, and build some of our smaller tier wines, which is something that I really love. For me, I started in the wine industry, I guess by happenstance. It's these moments that you never know what's going to happen that take you off a different path, and that was certainly my experience, because what had happened to me, I was actually, I was raised in Salt Lake City, in Utah. I mean, you don't think that, and actually Katie, the winemaker at Chehalem, is also from Utah, so there's something in the water. But, I mean, you wouldn't think that we would get into wine being raised in Salt Lake City. My parents were from the East Coast, from New York City, and we moved to Utah in the 80s. And fast forward to college, I came up to Oregon and went to undergrad at University of Oregon. And I studied general science. I focus on biology and chemistry. And I was going to be a doctor because that's what the metric for success was when you are in a science field, especially at that time. At least that's what my parents thought. You're either going to be a doctor or a lawyer. But really, I was going to focus on optometry. And I was working in that field, and I went on a Harley ride with my husband. Back then, he was my boyfriend, and we were just on this ride with a whole bunch of people from all these different backgrounds, and it was like we went down to Reno. We went on a Harley ride, like a week-long Harley ride down to Reno, and along the way, this gentleman was like, I just met somebody who is a great consultant, and he travels around the world, and he's, drinks a lot of great wine, and I was like, I'd like to, and he said, you need to have a strong science background, and all kind of the bells went out. I was like, I like to drink wine, I like to travel the world, I have a science background. So, much to my parents' chagrin, I actually deferred optometry school and applied to a master's program in the University of Adelaide in Australia, and went down there for 2 years and studied and completed my master's down there. I came back to Oregon in 2007, and I was really just thinking that I would come here for harvest, check it out. I was proselytizing the good word of Oregon Pinot all over. I was like, oh, South Australia doesn't know how to make good Pinot. They do, actually. But back then, I was like, oh, I need to go back. I kept talking about Oregon Pinot. So we came back for one harvest. And after that, my husband and I both got jobs, offered jobs pretty much right after we finished harvest. And at that point, we were like, both of these places, you don't get offered jobs readily. So we decided to stay. So that was 2007. Fast forward, now it's 2020, which feels futuristic to say. Oh my God. So yeah, house and 2 kids, 2 cats later, we're still here.
I love that story. I think, this being my first evening in Portland, I want to get that on the tape. I think this is great, to have the sort of the two of you. I think you're going to play off each other very well, and I think give me a really good insight and give me a good start to my journeys here. I want to just sort of dip back into the group though, and the different wine brands, and wonder if you would orientate me and orientate the listener to those brands. What's the sort of production size, and what is the sort of nature? What is it that makes those brands different and makes them unique?
Absolutely. So Chehalem is definitely the brand that started it all. It really is in all of the ways that you can classically think. Our production facility at Chehalem is quite humble. In fact, we joke a lot of time that it's old school winemaking Oregon style, because it very much is that quintessential Oregon winery, no bells, no whistles, and yet killer juice coming out of that facility year in, year out. We do about 20,000 cases annually, primarily Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but also Pinot Gris and Riesling and Gruner Veltliner and Trousseau Noir and Gamay Noir and a little bit of Mondouse Noir, depending on the vintage. Chehalem has really truthfully prided itself on having a wine to go with every single course of the meal and not being afraid to experiment outside the status quo of what is believed to be done in Oregon. And it tends to be a little bit more geeky of a brand, a little bit more education focused. And we really try and not be overbearing or snooty with how we present that. We really try and customize it depending on who is in the tasting room or who's visiting us out at the winery. The Stoller brand is much bigger. The Chehalem property, as I mentioned before, has 3 estate vineyards. We're planting out a baby vineyard right now that should be online in about 3 to 4 years. And hopefully I'll be able to say a name eventually. But apparently you can't trademark them till you have wine in a bottle. So more to come on that. Yeah, I know. Fun, right? The Chehalem property, or the Stoller property, by contrast, is one 400-acre parcel that we have 230 acres planted to grapevine now. Of that, 60% is Pinot Noir, 25-ish% is Chardonnay. Oh, that math is all wrong. And there's like 11%-ish of other things, but clearly I do words and not numbers. Of our other things, we have some Riesling, some Pinot Blanc, some Tempranillo, some Aligote, some Pinot Meunier, some Gamay now. The Syrah. Just a kiss of Viognier. Yeah, we've got like 0.14 acre planted to Viognier that's purposely there to go with the Syrah in a Côte Rôtie inspired style. They're co-grown, co-fermented, co-harvested together as one big happy family. And then when Bill took full ownership of Chehalem, and then of course he had Stoller, we really looked at our portfolio and our offerings, and it was very clear that we had 2 boutique luxury brands. And Melissa Burr has a side brand called History that really the whole impetus behind it is she had been making estate-grown wines her entire career. And her husband is a vineyard manager, And his mother-in-law had purchased this vineyard that was planted on the Washington side of the Columbia Gorge back in the late 1960s. It's one of the first vineyards that was out in the region, and she really wanted to make wine from this old vine fruit. I mean, the vineyard starts, by comparison, the Willamette Valley is like 200 to about 800 feet in elevation for the most part. I think there's a few vineyards, especially for sparkling, above that, but that's kind of your range for the Willamette Valley. This vineyard starts at 1,800 feet in elevation, like double anything that we're doing at Stoller. So she's like, I kind of want to make wine with this. And Bill's like, why do you want to make wine with this? You have all of this vineyard behind you. So Melissa is nothing if not persistent. And she went out and she ended up finding the first Cabernet planted in Washington State. She found a Muscat that was planted in 1917. The guy saw Prohibition coming in the U.S. and decided to rip out his table grapes and plant to vinifera so that he could bootleg during U.S. Prohibition. So once she had this like collection of old vine stuff, she's like, let's do this. Let's make a brand out of this and let people understand what old vine fruit tastes like. So that's our history brand, and it's old vine fruit, so there is not much production on any one of these wines. It's, maybe 100 cases, most of them much less than that. So now we've got this super boutique, 2 mid-sized boutiques, and we really wanted to have those other offerings. A wine for your Tuesday night tacos, or, your book club that really is just a bunch of ladies getting together to drink. And we had these 2 winemaking teams that had only ever been estate-driven wineries. So chemistry gave us the perfect opportunity to let the teams come together, get to know one another, and get to explore with all of the amazing fruit that's out there in the Willamette Valley. So our 5th brand really wanted to take advantage of the big rise in alternative packaging and the canned wine movement. And our initial concept behind it was that this would be something for millennials or Gen Zers to get them excited about wine and get them familiar with what wine should be. What we're finding is that they really don't care, but boomers and Gen Xers and us old millennials really want to have wine when we're doing other things like tailgating or going skiing or going camping or having a backyard barbecue, or maybe sneaking into a movie. And we still want a good quality wine when we do it, but we don't want the fuss of a heavy bottle and glassware and a wine key to access it. Yeah, I mean, it's for all those other times that you want wine and the traditionality of wine doesn't work. So we kicked off the canned Oregon and chemistry brands about the same time. Chemistry has been out for just a year now. It's a fledgling little wine brand that's an off-premise, on-premise play. So you'll never find this at the winery. You'll only ever find it in retail or at a restaurant. Canned Oregon's got maybe 6 months more longevity to that, and similar. We very rarely have it at the winery available. Sometimes we will if we're having a big event come in. But it really is, it's that retail wine play for when you're going out and you're going to be active and you want to have something to grab. Throw in the cooler, throw in a backpack, bring it out there.
I love your description, Michelle. I think it's really great to get the overview, and you've given us a sense of, I guess, the grapes that have been planted, the areas, the production. I want to shift gears a little bit now and get you, Kate, to talk to the wine and kind of what's in the glass. And these are, I guess, your babies here that we're gonna be consuming. So maybe just for each wine, tell us a bit about how the production goes and what we're seeing turning up in the glass here.
So I'm going to start with one of the wines that's, all of them are near and dear to my heart. It's kind of like saying what your favorite child is. And it's really hard. It's like, what's your favorite wine? I have a hard time with that because it depends on my mood, much like my favorite child. So the first wine, though, was something when I first started at Stoller, and they had mentioned that they wanted to really build a sparkling program. The bells went off, and I was just like, done. Yes. When I graduated from school, I was like, I just naively said, I'm going to make sparkling wine. This is what I'm going to do. I mean, not really taking into the capital or the time that it takes to actually do it, the reality of it. But to really get a chance to do it from estate fruit is pretty glorious. So the wine that we have in our glass is our 2015 LaRue's. This is traditional method sparkling. It is 75% Pinot Noir, 25% Chardonnay, and it comes from old vine Pinot Noir and Chardonnay off of our property. So we make it, it's always the first thing that we pick. So harvest starts early for sparkling, and we do that so we keep the sugars low and the acid high, much like in the tradition of champagne. So this spent about 3 years on lees. So, well, fast forward after we make it the base wine, much like you do any type of wine, and then you bottle it about 9 months, 6 to 9 months after you make it. This wine is barrel fermented, and we then put it into bottle in traditional method where you add yeast and sugar, and that's what's really going to provide the effervescence later. So this spent 3 years on those lees, and we were able to, this is the second disgorgement, and I think what I love most about this wine, one, is that it has just a hint of that Pinot Noir character. Sparkling wine in general doesn't have the extraction that red wine has. So you're not getting overt like cherry. You're getting more nuanced characteristics. Like for me, I see, because this wine has spent more time in bottle, a little bit more brioche, a little bit of ginger. I see a little bit of that red fruit, but it's not overt. What I like the most about it, because of that time in bottle, it's got a little roundness on the palate and a really nice finish to it. So, I love these wines. I love making sparkling wines, we're doubling down at Stoller. So it's great. It's one of my favorite things to make.
Just a small note. I think it's lovely. I think it's so nicely balanced, and it just feels very food friendly. And you know, we may well be sitting in the right restaurant for this. You know, I think sushi is something that's not overly heavy. That's not going to overpower this. I think I'm looking forward to trying out a pairing later on.
One of my favorite things to have with sparkling wine is charcuterie. Kind of that oiliness from the meat and kind of paired with the acidity pairs really well. Same with something as, banal like popcorn. Like I think there's a misconception that sparkling wine has to be celebratory, which I'm glad that we drink it when we're celebrating, but celebrating life every Tuesday. Like, oh, it's Monday. We're celebrating life today, so why not drink sparkling? But I think you're absolutely right. Having it with sushi, there's the complexity of flavors. This is one of the expressions of Chardonnay that we have on our property. Like Michelle said, we have 60 acres of Chardonnay, so that provides us with a pretty broad canvas in terms of making different types of Chardonnay. So this is our stainless steel fermented Chardonnay. So there's no oak in this Chardonnay. It's bright, it's fruit forward. It tends to have a lot of lemon and stone fruit, and it is something that showcases just how wonderful Chardonnay is. It's light and refreshing. I think oftentimes when people think of Chardonnay, especially in the U.S., they think of big, oaky, buttery Chardonnays. And this is really the antithesis of it. It's as far as you can get from that, because it doesn't go through malolactic fermentation that produces that butteriness. It stays in a stainless steel tank, which provides a linearity to it and makes it super easy to drink. This wine is something that I gravitate towards, now I just said I drank on Tuesday, but it's an everyday type of drinker, and you can pair it with just about anything. But it's light and it pairs well with like Asian fare, much like we're having right now.
We're obviously on the same wavelength here, because I was gonna ask just really about that what you just mentioned. How does this go down in the marketplace? You know, my own perception is that, the you know, of course, making a huge generalization, but the American palate does go much more towards the buttery, the more oaky Chardonnay. So, is this a hard sell?
It's not a hard sell at all. And I think there was this, ABC, anything but Chardonnay. There was this trend for the longest time that people just misunderstood Chardonnay. It's one of my favorite varietals. And like I mentioned, that this is just one style of Chardonnay that we make. We have a barrel fermented, but it's not buttery. We have a concrete fermented that it has a minerality to it. And then we have more of a traditional style Chardonnay. It spends longer time in barrique. But what's so cool about Chardonnay is that it has so many faces, right? You can have so many different expressions of it, and I love that about it. It's honestly one of my favorite varietals to work with because you can. It's this clean slate. You can have the opportunity to. I don't want to guide it in a certain way, and it's going to express itself so differently. This wine is meant to be just bright and lovely, and it pairs well with like a fish, and it's just light on its feet. You know, for this particular style, it's meant to be consumed on the earlier side, but because it is under screw cap, it does keep that freshness longer. So we certainly have seen our Chardonnays age, 15 years. And because we have the luxury of having that history, we're able to go back into our cellar and look at that. And it's just like, oh my God, it's not going to look like what it does right now, but there's something beautiful in its evolution. And something like the stainless steel Chardonnay, the acidity is so bright. You're not going to have as much of those kind of fruit-forward characteristics, but it will still evolve into something really special, as opposed to something that's barrel-aged, which is also constructed to age. Those tend to have a richer mouthfeel. And for us in Oregon, I don't think anybody is really looking for something that's buttery. In fact, we go to the opposite. There's a way to create Chardonnay with richness and intention, and that shows a sense of place without going to that world that is contrived, that is buttery and oak, that seem to suit a certain fashion. And I don't think that, it's out of fashion right now, but what we have moved to, in some places, what we have moved to, though, is something that people are talking about Chardonnays that are site-driven, terroir-driven, for if you want to throw that word around. But something that's a true expression of the vineyard. So we're not trying to completely erase where it's from by throwing a lot of oak at it. We're trying to guide it into a style that really makes sense for what we want to drink, create, and what is coming off of our property. So for me, I work with the chemistry project, which is animals from another part of the world. But right now, for me, my day-to-day is focused mainly just on the site. And so it's with working with chemistry, what spices are these from the outside world when looking at other vineyards, because I'm so site-specific and so site-focused. And I'm not there all the time just looking at their sections from our 400-acre property and showcasing the nuances of all the microclimates that come from that. 400 acres is pretty big, right? So, and we'll get to that as we move to the reds.
So there's definitely a bit of a Chardonnay revolution happening here in Oregon. Chardonnay was one of the original varieties planted alongside Pinot Noir in the early days, and for whatever reason, it very quickly became believed that Oregon couldn't make good Chardonnay. Now, whether that was because the best land was planted to Pinot Noir and Chardonnay was an afterthought, or we had the wrong clonal material, or it was the consumer's preference for that big, buttery, rich style of Chardonnay, I cannot say for sure. But I can say that in the last 10 years, we've seen a resurgence in the number of producers making Chardonnay and the number of styles available. So in your glass is the Chehalem Reserve Chardonnay from the 2017 vintage. And unlike the Stoller Dundee Hills Chardonnay, this wine sees about 30% new oak, and the rest of it is neutral oak. The goal with this wine is to create a slightly elevated style of Chardonnay without overbearing and becoming that ABC butter bomb that is Chardonnay. It is sourced 100% from the Stoller Vineyard, and I know Katie has said in the past that she believes the Stoller Vineyard is probably one of her favorite places to drink Chardonnay from, whether that's the Stoller winemakers or her or the people we used to sell it to in the past. Just the site is truthfully beautiful for producing world-class Chardonnay.
It's really nice to be able to try those two side by side. I think they, potentially complement each other very well. They feel, even though, as we've just established, the same fruit, the same property, and teams who are working side by side, there's definitely a unique characteristic from each of those. So I guess it's just exciting really what you can get from the same property, what you can get from the same fruit, and maybe we're already starting to just speak to that kind of the diversity that's possible.
There's the diversity, but also there's like I said before, continuity. There's a thread of familiarity through them, and like I said, there's Chardonnay can have so many different expressions. So we showed you the stainless steel from Stoller, but then we also have more traditional as well. And so if you were to put these two side by side, there would be that family resemblance in a way, which is nice. And that allows us within two brands within the same company to work together and think about it. This rosé, it's so wonderful. I love the story. And so in 2005, really, it was the first year that the original winery, the winery that I manage, was created. And in that year, rosé was just kind of coming out into the valley. It was either, people made a little bit of rosé, but back then people thought rosé was sweet, right? And they made rosé out of Saignée method, which was something that was a byproduct of concentrating your Pinot Noir. And so it was more of an afterthought. And in 2005, Melissa started making a rosé, but made it intentionally. So you have to farm a little bit differently. You certainly pick it a little differently than you would a traditional, big or traditional red style Pinot Noir. But she made it as an intentional rosé. So that means picking it a little bit earlier, pressing it, and creating a wine. So having minimal time on skin, so you don't get as much color, but you get just enough color to make a rosé. But also that gentle time on skins provides a lot of flavor. So Bill Stoller at that point, why did you do that? Right? Why did you make this rosé? It wasn't necessarily understood, but it was popular in the tasting room, and so they continued to do it, and it was a couple hundred cases here and there. And now, 15 years later, rosé is such a cornerstone of what we make, and it's something that we're really proud of. We make this all intentionally. So we specifically farm for it. We crop a little bit heavier. We choose our sites wisely. And we bring it into the winery and treat it with kid gloves, because this is something that Stoller has become known for. And this is something that, year to year, we wanted to have vintage variants, but really we also want it consistent. So this is the perfect wine that should go out into the market. What I love about this wine is just so fruit forward. It leaps out of your glass. There's just so much going on in terms of, it's not like a simple rosé, and it's certainly not sweet. And it just carries the length of your palate. There's, to me, there's a hint of sweet watermelon and a little bit of bubblegum, and there's, so many other aromatics there that I just adore. So this is something that, we are making in earnest, in a good way, and it's something that gosh, I hope it makes it to the UK eventually.
I'm so happy that you told the story in that way, as in it was an experiment. It was somebody got an idea and, was kind of allowed to run with it and ran with it anyway. And then over time, through feedback and through, I guess, improvement and modification of techniques, it's now your largest production wine that you have. Sorry, second largest. I think other people in the wine industry, that I come across, can really learn from that, because when you do have a lot of history tied up in your production and your product, I think often it can actually count against you. It means that you don't necessarily try out new things, and maybe not everything will be as successful as the rosé has been for you, but unless you try, you kind of never know. So yeah, I just think that's what I anticipate, I think, finding as well over this side of the pond, that people are not afraid to try new things and experiment in a way that we maybe don't always in the old world.
I think you're right. I think it is very Bill Stoller, but I also think that we're not beholden to a certain paradigm like the old world, where you have to pick on a certain day. You have limitations on how you can really make wine. And I think, Oregon draws an adventurous spirit, and there's a great collaboration within the valley. I think you'll find so many people. You'll hear that. I will be the first person, but you will hear it often in your travels here. But we have this opportunity every vintage to experiment just a little bit, and so you don't know. You never know what the vintage is going to give you, but you certainly don't know exactly how everything's going to turn out. And so it's always good to flex your muscles. Kind of figure out, something new to explore every harvest, which it's one of my favorite times of the year, but it's your opportunity to play around and see what, really resonates.
Just that whole thought that you had there on experimentation, I think that's it very much comes top down, right? Bill is a self-made man, and what I value about working for him and working for a company like the Stoller Wine Group is that he gives us autonomy to make a decision and give it a try, right? He doesn't micromanage. If you could put the case together as to why something's a good idea, try and fail. That's okay, because you're never going to get there if you don't try. And I think that's something that we're very fortunate to have in an owner like Bill, that a lot of wineries may not, or heck, even other industries, they don't have that luxury to, let's see if this works. And if it doesn't work, let's fail it fast and let's try something else and let's pivot. But if it does work, this rosé is our second largest production wine.
It's pretty dreamy from a winemaking standpoint. We have... there's a lot of trust put onto us, and we get the opportunity to play around and to make small wines that don't go onto the market, just go to our tasting room, where it's the result of experimentation. And so it's kind of this incubation period, and Bill Stoller is so lovely, and he's like, okay, and he's very contemplative, and he will sit there and think about it, and he's like, interesting. But he will never tell you not to do it. His view is so long when thinking about companies and thinking about, life in general. He has this very sage kind of personality to him, where he's like, It takes him, and it's one of my favorite things about working with the company. And from a winemaker standpoint, you don't get the opportunity to have artistic latitude or to be experimental very often.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to try the whites and try the rosé, of course, really enjoying these wines. But it would be, it feels like an important moment, trying the first Pinots of the trip, which is, of course, the grape variety that that Oregon is most known for, and the Willamette Valley is most known for. So, yeah, let's go inside these two quite different looking Pinots and see what they tell us about the region.
Yeah, the next three wines are really quite very different, going from the 35,000-foot view down, looking into the 10,000, really looking down into the 5,000. So in our glass right now is the Chehalem 3-Vineyard Pinot Noir. And we call it 3-Vineyard because Chehalem has 3 estate vineyards. We have Corral Creek, which is where our winery home is. We have Stoller Vineyard, which is where the Stoller family estate home is. And then we also have Ridgecrest, which is the original vineyard that got Bill in the wine industry. So this wine is a blend of those three estates, representing 3 different AVAs, and now the 7 AVAs of the Willamette Valley, not including the Willamette Valley itself. And what I love about this wine is it really is the Willamette Valley in a glass. It's fruit forward, but it's also a little dark and spicy. And a word that I use a lot is brambly, because it's not green, it's not vegetal, but there is this underbrush and earthy quality to the wine. With this wine, our whole goal is that it's consumed in its youth, right? Which isn't to mean that it doesn't age. It ages absolutely stunningly, but we want something that within a year and a half after harvest that someone can crack into and enjoy without giving it a second thought. And it represents our estates. The Willamette Valley as a whole is a huge region. It's 150 miles long from Portland down to Eugene. It's about 60 miles wide from the Cascades over to the coastal range. So this is a really big area that we're talking about in span. And this is a couple years old. This is the 2016 vintage. So at the time, it comprised half of the sub-regions within the Willamette Valley, and really just trying to give a bright, fresh look to what Willamette Valley wine could be.
I've written down brambly. I think that's such a good description. It's just that, just something a little bit wild is maybe not exactly the right word, but that this isn't sort of cultivated fruit that's been sort of tamed. There is a sort of an energy here. There is a sort of an expression of a real vibrancy. I will say though, the thing that I noticed most is the color of it. It's got this sort of such a deep, rich color, and there may not be too much to add beyond that, but I wonder, is there something you can say to that appearance and maybe a little bit even to that energy that we're talking about?
So it's 2016 vintage, which is definitely one of the warmest vintages on record in Oregon. I don't believe it's the warmest, but it's up there in the top 3. Oh, Kate's telling me it's the warmest. It's the warmest. My appearance to the color really is going to come from our Ridgecrest property. So our Ridgecrest property is located in the Ribbon Ridge AVA, and it is definitely dense. It is, and when I mean dense, I mean that in terms of like fruit expression, both on the nose, the palate, in how it presents itself. Ridgecrest is such a beautiful, beautiful vineyard. But it's a bit of a brute, it needs some time to open up and really show its true colors. It's a vineyard that in its youth can get overlooked very easily because people won't understand it. But when Ridgecrest speaks to you, it really speaks. And I think that that's where we're getting a lot of the color extraction in this wine right now. So our next wine is the 2017 Corral Creek Pinot Noir from Chehalem Winery. Corral Creek is where our winery home is. Planted in 1983 by the Housen family, who were doctors in Portland. And what I love about this story, and the label as you're looking at it, Lawrence, is an artist rendering of what the vineyard at Corral Creek looks like. So the doctors back in 1983 could not get funding to plant a vineyard, so they planted as cash was available. And the easiest way to plant a vineyard in those days was to plant to the contours of the land versus planting in straight rows. So Corral Creek has these like labyrinth of sort of vineyards where you'll be walking down a row and all of a sudden it will dead end into another row and you'll have to backtrack and you won't realize why, but it was really them just trying to maximize dollars for space. Corral Creek is probably my favorite of the Chehalem estate vineyards, and the reason that I like it is that the wines are so elegant and so beautiful, and they produce wines with vibrant acidity, beautiful, delicate red fruit, very light, fine-grained tannins, just absolutely stunning. We do about 300 cases of this wine, minimal oak. I believe it's 30% new oak, the rest of it neutral. Again, to not overpower the delicacy that's coming out of the Corral Creek vineyard and really just let the fruit and that site shine as the hero. Corral Creek is located in the Chehalem Mountains AVA, which is our namesake. Chehalem is the Native American word for Valley of Flowers. And it's something that's very near and dear to us. As we've reimagined the brand within the last year, we've come out with our third label rendition in our 30-year history. And 2020 marks the 30-year history or 30th anniversary of Chehalem Winery. And as we were going through this process, we really wanted to do something that paid homage to the AVA, to our name, to the word Chehalem, and the people who were on this land far before we were, and to really call out the fact that this is a valley of flowers, and what grows together goes together. You know, here in the Willamette Valley, we can grow a number of fruits and vegetables and nuts, and our wines are made to go with all of those things.
Yeah, so this is, the last Pinot for the evening. Who knows where the night will take us. But right now, this is, the last Pinot that we're going to show you tonight. And this is certainly a wine that's very close to me. This is Helen's. So, it's named after Bill Stoller's aunt, who lived on the property. And we make a few wines named after important women in Bill Stoller's life. The LaRue's, the sparkling, that you tasted, that is his wife. Helen is his aunt. And then he has Ruth, which was his mother, and Nancy, who's his sister. So goodness, you don't want to mess up on a wine that's named after any of the women in Bill Stoller's life. So we look at... From our property, we do a few different tiers of Pinot Noir. So we do a Dundee Hills Pinot Noir, which is kind of the broader view. We like to look at it as like our mosaic, taken from every single area of our property. And then we start to get a little bit myopic. Then we go to the Reserve, which is taken primarily from old vine Pinot Noir, and we make the blend that way. And then we're getting even more site-specific and looking at the microclimates and thinking about how to express these different clones on the property. So this one is Wädenswil. So Wädenswil is a Swiss clone, and it presents itself so differently in the Willamette Valley, and certainly in the Dundee Hills, and even more certainly in off of the Stoller property. Because this is so different from any of the Wädenswil that I've ever worked with. And it's such a beautiful wine to make. So the goal for this, and when Bill comes and tastes, he's like, "Oh, it should have pie cherry," and it has some of that. But what really strikes me about the Helen's is that it has this floral aromatics. And it's not like a heady floral. It's and it changes vintage per vintage, but it's more like sometimes a lily. And certainly but right now I'm seeing definitely this floral aspect to it. In a vintage like 2016, like we touched upon, is that 2016 was one of the warmest vintages on record, right? It was certainly a shock for the Willamette Valley. But we started picking in 2016 for sparkling August 18th, which just so happens was 3 weeks after I had my second child. So sometimes when I drink any of these wines, I kind of hear my baby crying in the background because he was with me the entire vintage. But what made it early was not only that it was warm, but what was interesting is that we had a rain event during fruit set, so the clusters were tiny. They were like these little grenades, and so there weren't a lot of berries, many berries on there, and it ripened the fruit and concentrated it a little bit sooner. And because of that, we picked it early, right? We picked it earlier than we may have, but we still had a lot of concentration. I love this vintage. It's broad, and it's certainly ripe, but I think what we've learned as a Willamette Valley is that we can pick responsibly and not have these bombastic, huge wines. And we farm for each vintage. So we think about wines in a different way. 2016 is such a special vintage. And despite it being, which could be considered pejorative, it was the hottest vintage on record. It was, but it's not. The yields were low. We had a lot of concentration. And I think we learned from our, not saying mistakes, but we learned from our past. In that we can have the same concentration and the same but also the elegance by treating the wines a little bit differently. But yeah, Helen's being all Wadensville, which in other sites to me were just these massive wines with lots of shoulders, kind of like the Michael Phelps, the clone of Pinot Noir. And this to me, it tells a story of a specific part of our vineyard. It's at the top. It's old vine. It's over 20 years old. And it's something really special. So I love making this wine. It's one of the kind of small blends that we make, but it's something that kind of presents itself and the story unfolds as like the wine, as we're blending the wine. And it's always taken from that particular vineyard or particular section. This is it's only about 18 barrels, maybe less. So it's a barrel selection of that clone from a specific part of the vineyard.
Yeah, thank you both so much again. I think it's really just incredible to try those three Pinots back to back. I feel very honoured to be able to do that, and I think, just thinking back now, elegance. I think that was I don't know if we're on the same wavelength or there's some telepathy going on, but I was actually thinking elegance was the word, but. And I was thinking of it, specifically in relation to the Helens, but I'd actually say that there's the line of elegance actually that runs through all three, showing up very differently in the glass, appearance-wise certainly, and the experience across the three has been very different, but all have been very elegant, all have been very approachable. It's just. I think as well, it would just be so interesting to, and I guess you do have the opportunity to sort of try those back vintages and those library vintages. But I just wonder if anybody else out there in the marketplace is lucky enough to do that, because they're just so drinkable. and I just think, that approachability as well. I just think these are lovely wines, and I'm sure you have many fans, and I'm sure coming to the tasting room, these almost must sell themselves because they're delicious.
These legacy wines, and we have the future in mind, right? Especially for some of these smaller blends, they're constructed with longevity in mind. So knowing that these sections are going to, they're slated pretty early on. Like, this is going to be what is going to go into our top tier. So with that in mind, we farm particularly for that. Not that we don't do that for our other tiers, but this is something that we want to have. It's named Legacy for a reason, right? Like, we want it to look beautiful after 20 years plus. So, and we do have the opportunity, even though it's smaller blends, there is the opportunity, unfortunately not necessarily often in the market, but when you come to Stoller, we do have those vertical tastings that we provide, and we get a chance to kind of look back and remember old friends and these sweet wines that come around and are like, oh, hi, I remember you. Goodness, how you doing, friend? But that's one of the most compelling parts about being in the wine industry is you can look back in your history, and each bottle kind of opens up and tells a story, and you can remember, oh, crikey, I had a kid that vintage, that was nuts, or I really love that vintage for whatever reason, and that wine will tell that story later.
Yeah, just to kind of close off, really, again, a huge thank you to you both, and for your input and your choice in selecting these wines. But I do always like to finish on a future-oriented note, and seeing as we are sat here in January 2020, start of a new year, start of a new decade, I would just invite you both to look ahead and let me know, in whatever sort of time frame makes sense for you sitting here, what is it that you're particularly looking forward to?
I'm going to steal Kate's, and I know that it's going to be Kate's. I'm most excited for the future of sparkling wine here in Oregon. Pinot Noir is our king. Chardonnay will be our queen. Whether people want to embrace it or not, Chardonnay is coming. And if we can make exceptional Pinot Noir and we can make exceptional Chardonnay, sparkling is a no-brainer. And I think that the biggest barrier in the past has been total volume and case production in Oregon. The average Oregon winery is 5,000 cases or less, so the time and equipment that goes into sparkling has been prohibitive. But there are alternative solutions, and there are people out there now that are willing to help a small producer in terms of equipment or whatever you need in between. And I think that the future for Oregon is bubbles.
Oh, good. There's job retention. Thank God. I agree. I'm excited about that. But there's so many things that I'm excited about. There's a certain sense of optimism that comes along with a new year and a new decade. And we're just beginning to figure out how to farm for, a changing climate, really. So turning something that is, on the forefront of everybody's mind, but making it positive, right? We're all faced with this. And we are, as a valley, looking towards, different varietals, but also different ways to manage Pinot Noir, and we're being creative, and there's so many wonderful things that I love about a new year and certainly a new decade. I think Willamette Valley in itself is young by comparison, and so, as I mentioned earlier, we're not held to any paradigm. We don't have to color inside any lines or any box, and we get the opportunity to write our own story. And I think we are having that opportunity now, and with the recognition of the Willamette Valley, we're able to get that message out there, which is great. So that's what I'm excited about, and the bubbles too. But there's so much. It's still an unwritten story, and I know you're going to get a chance to talk to some of the pioneers, which is so phenomenal because their perspective is certainly unique to Oregon. And I think they'll probably say something similar. So at least I hope so.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Kate. It was an absolute pleasure meeting you both, and a great way to get my journey started off. Do see below for all the details of the wines that we tasted, and below that the websites for Chehalem Wines and the Stoller family estate. As mentioned, this is the first of a 20-part series, so if you haven't already, then do please subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to be alerted when new episodes go live. The next part of the journey, in episode 381, takes us across to Cooper Mountain Winery, where I meet Barbara Gross, GM. And if you're not already following along, then do please follow me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.